So layered tetrad, the layered tetrad is a framework designed to help game designers and analysts to deeply understand and create games by focusing on different aspects that make up a game. So it looks beyond just the game mechanics to explore how the game is played and how it affects and is affected by the culture and around it. So this approach helps in creating a game that is more than just set of rules, but but one that has meaning, engages players, and connects with a with a broader audience. So the layered tetrad is not a definition of what a game is, but rather a tool that helps designers think about all the elements involved in a game and what happens to those elements both during and after gameplay. So it allows game creators to see the big picture by considering how games operate, not only in terms of play, but also in terms of their impact on social interactions, meaning, and culture. So the layered tetrad is made up of four core elements, just like a but it adds a uh, three layers that expand on how these elements are experienced. So first one is inscribed layer. Uh, so inscribed layer, this layer refers to a game's formal rules and mechanics, the things that are programmed and fixed. So these are the instructions, rules, and structures that the game designer creates. They don't change during the game, but they are inscribed into the game design. This is the foundation of the game. So dynamic layer, this layer looks at how the game is played beyond by real players, real people. While the inscribed layer consists of fixed rules, the dynamic layer involves how players interact with those rules and the system. It includes the flow of the game, player choices, and the strategies that emerge as the game moves. So this is where the game comes alive during gameplay. And we have cultural layer. So cultural layer is the third layer. The third layer expands beyond the game and examines how the game fits into the broader culture. So this layer looks at how the game influences players, communities, and even a society as a whole. So it considers how the game reflects social norms, values, and meanings, and how it becomes part of the culture, such as through fan communities, cultural references, or even how it shapes conversations in everyday life. So together, these three layers give a complete view of games design, experience, and cultural significance. So understanding the layered tetrad helps game creators not only focus on designing the mechanics, but also think how their game will be played and how it might influence or be influenced by the world outside of the game. So each of these layers will be discussed in more detail to help you consider everything from the rules to impact their game has on culture. So this approach is especially useful for those who want to create meaningful games that resonate with players on deeper level. So first is inscribed layer and dynamic layer. So the inscribed layer of tetrad refers to everything in a game that is predefined and exists before the player interacts with it. Think of it as a blueprint or a foundation of the game. So the parts of the the parts that are fixed and unchanging, like the rules, art, and technology. Uh, it include it includes four key elements. First one is mechanics. So mechanics, these are the inscribed rules and systems that define how the game works. Mechanics include things like player actions, how your score points, and the objectives of the game, and the boundaries of what the player can do. For example, in chess, the way each piece moves is a inscribed mechanic. Aesthetics. So this refers to all sensory elements of the game, how it looks, sounds, and feels. It includes things like graphics, music, or any physical elements like packing. For example, the artwork on the game board and the design of the characters and even the game soundtrack are all part of the inscribed aesthetics. And we have technology. So technology, this is the underlying technology that makes the game function. For digital games, it's the software and hardware, the game's code, the game engine or console. We also have non-digital games, which is it might be something like cards. So this element is important for designers because the technology determines what is possible in the game. And we have narrative. Narrative is this covers the pre-written story and the characters of the game. It's everything that has been scripted or predetermined, including the backstory, plot, character development. For example, in a story-driven game, the narrative is all the events that happen as the part of the main storyline. So the inscribed layer is like a set of ingredients that exist before the player starts interacting with the game. So the designer creates these elements, but they only come to life when the player begins to engage with them. Uh, Dynamic layer. So the dynamic layer represents what happens when the game is being played. So it's all about what the player does and how the game responds. So this layer emerges from the interaction between the player and the game's inscribed elements. So it also consists of four elements, but these are more about what happens during gameplay. So first one is mechanics. Mechanics, while the inscribed mechanics are the rules, the dynamic mechanics are how the player actually use those rules. So it's the strategies, actions players take during the game. For example, in chess, the dynamic mechanics are the moves players make as they attempt to outsmart each other. So these mechanics are not just what's written in the rule book, but how players use those rules in practice. And aesthetics. So the dynamic aesthetics are the sensory experience that are generated during gameplay. So it could be the sounds that change uh, based on what the player does, or the feeling of excitement or tension as the game progresses. So even reactions like physical reactions from pressing buttons too much are the part of dynamic aesthetics. And technology. So dynamic technology describes how the game's technology behaves during play. So this includes from everything the game's code does while the game is running, like how enemies move, how the AI reacts, and how a dice rolling mechanic generates outcomes. Uh, so that's about dynamic technology. The last one is narrative. Dynamic narrative is the story that unfolds while playing the game, which is often unique to each playthrough. So it could be It could be a player's path through a branching narrative in a role-playing game, or emergent stories that happen during multiplayer games. So the dynamic layer is everything that happens as a result of the player interacting with the game. It's where the game becomes alive and personalized for each player, creating a unique experience that are different from just the static elements that are pre-designed. So the inscribed layer is everything designed into the game before the player starts. Rules, visuals, technology, and the story. It's the foundation of the game, and the dynamic layer is what happens during the game, the actions, experiences, the stories that emerge during play. Understanding both layers helps in designing games that are not only fun to play but also offer a rich, dynamic experience for players. So next topic is cultural layer. So cultural layer of the tetrad looks at how game interacts with and influence the world outside of just being played. So it focuses on how games impact culture and how culture influence games. So the key idea is that once a game is released, the player community often takes over in terms of how the game is used, modified, and remembered. So this layer also shows that as game designers, we have a societal responsibility for the games we create and their impact. So let's break down the four key elements of the cultural layer. Again, mechanics. The cultural mechanics include things that players do to modify or change the game, like creating modifications that change the way the game works. So these mods could be simple tweaks or complex changes that alter the core gameplay. Uh, Mechanics in this layer cover the impact of how a game's rules or systems affect society, uh, like the GTA 3, the ability for the player to commit certain in-game actions created a big controversy. So showing how games mechanics affected public perception. So cultural aesthetics refers to how players and fans create new aesthetic works based on the game. So this could be things like fan-made artwork, remixes of game music, or cosplay where player fans dress up as game characters. So these are the things that the game's players control, unlike official products like Pokemon, uh, which are controlled by creators of the game. So cultural technology. So cultural technology looks at how game technology is used outside of the game. For example, algorithms developed for character movement in the games might be used in robotics. So it also includes how players use technology to change the game experience. For example, some players might use special controllers that make the game easier, or create mods that change how the game behaves. So narrative. So cultural narrative includes the stories that the players create based on the game. This can be fan fiction, fan-made films, or even stories that about the characters and worlds in the game. It also covers how society talks about the game. Uh, so in the cultural layer, the players take control of how the game is remembered, experienced, and even modified. As designers, this layer reminds us the games don't just live in isolation; they become a part of broader cultural discussions and how and have an impact on society. So it's important to think how your game will be received and what kind of legacy it will leave behind. So it's about cultural layer. So responsibility of a designer, of the designer. So the responsibility of the designer extends beyond just creating a game structure. Designers influence how people interact with their games, how players behave, and how game impact society. So let's break this down into three key areas: inscribed, dynamic, and cultural responsibilities. So the inscribed layer responsibility, at this level, game designers are responsible for the rules, mechanics, aesthetics, and narrative. So they put into the game. These are the core elements that exist whether the game is being played or not. So it's the designer's job to make sure these elements are well thought out, and engaging, so players have a clear and enjoyable experience. Um, the dynamic layer, the dynamic layer responsibility. The dynamic layer is thicker because it refers to how players interact with the game systems during play. So players often find ways to use the mechanics in ways that weren't expected by the designers. For example, uh, the text. So yeah, instead of playing the game, players create servers where they stay logged in just to earn hats. This wasn't so. For example, in I think Valve, in 2009, Valve introduced a system in Team Fortress 2, I think, where players could earn hats by staying logged into the game. So instead of playing the game, the players just created a servers where they where they stayed logged in just to earn hats. So this wasn't how Valve intended the system to work, and they however, this example shows that players were simply reacting to the system Valve created. They didn't cheat. So they used the mechanics as designed. This means, as a designer, you're responsible for predicting how players might behave based on the systems you create, even if their behavior wasn't how you expected. You have to design systems that lead to the kind of experience you want players to have. And cultural layer responsibility, at the cultural layer, the designer responsibility becomes even broader. Games don't just exist in isolation, they influence and are influenced by society. Unfortunately, many designers don't think about how their games affect society. So it can lead to negative perceptions of games, with society seeing them as a violent or pointless. Designers must recognize the games can shape culture, and they need to be aware of how their games influence players. Games can teach, inspire, bring positive social change, but some games also encourage unhealthy behaviors like overspending, addiction. So this harms the reputation of gaming industry. So as a game designer, you have the responsibility to promote positive behavior and respect players' time and well-being. So if we create games that foster growth, learning, and positive engagement, we can change the negative stereotypes surrounding games and make them more respected in society. So the summary of this topic is basically it explains how layer tetrad framework shows the shift of control over a game from the developers to the players as you move through its three layers: inscribed, dynamic, and cultural. In the inscribed layer, the layer is fully controlled by game developers and designers. It includes all games rules, mechanics, aesthetics, technology, and the narrative created by the developers before the game is played. So at this point, the game is fully in the hands of the developers with no player interaction yet. And in the dynamic layer, this layer is where the game comes to life through the player interaction. It represents the moment when the player engage with the game and make decisions based on the inscribed elements. And the experience here is a mix of developer designed systems and the player choices. So ownership over the dynamic layer is shared between both the players and the developers. In the cultural layer, at this level, the game leaves the developers control and becomes a part of broader culture. So players take ownership, creating things like game mods or sharing their experiences. These mod mods allow players to change parts of the game, giving them more control over how the game is experienced. So the cultural layer is also includes how game is perceived by non-players in society, often shaped by how gaming community presents the game. So although the developers no longer control the cultural layer, they still have some responsibility for how their game impacts society. So this layer highlights the importance of understanding how community and the game impacts should be considered by the designers. So that's the end of this chapter.